Hey everybody, Tony D with your Hollywoke hot take. And today we're talking about why is the scene in Charlie Brown with Franklin racist? So let's see if we have a picture here in this article. But apparently everybody's making hay out of this. Is that the expression hay? No. Oh, here it is. So, this is the scene they're talking about. So, and really, there's a very simple explanation of why Franklin is sitting on one side of the table and the other characters are all sitting on the right side of the table. Now, understand that this special came out in 1973. The All in the Family came out in 71. And the Jeffersons came out in 75. And the Jeffersons were like a big deal. It was like a really big, popular black sitcom. One of the first really big ones. There were others, but, you had, what was the other one? The one with J.J. Walker. But I think the Jeffersons were before that. And so you didn't have a lot of black representation on television at all, but the 70s were a time like it was cool to have black characters. But they didn't write the characters very well. They were kind of all the same. They were kind of all like, except for All in the Family where it was a little better. And then maybe by the time you get to Sanford and Sons, they had sort of dropped a lot of the tropes about black characters and made them more sensible. But, there were a lot of tropes in the 70s. And they were kind of working them out. So it wasn't like, people got on TV and said, oh boy, let's really do some damage to the reputation of black people. Most of the people back in the 70s were just as woke and progressive and hippie as as the people who scream in Hollywood now, even more so. Look at Rob Reiner. Rob Reiner was meathead on All in the Family back in 1971. He was a hippie. He was the hippie son-in-law of Archie Bunker, who was, like an old school bigot. Like he wasn't a Klansman. He was like supposed to represent a typical, blue collar guy, and the world was changing and he hadn't changed with it, and he's set in his ways and he's got prejudices. But it was done in a very realistic way. It wasn't done like a caricature. So the characters around him, like when they introduced black characters, they introduced them in a way that made them very real and grounded in reality. They weren't crazy tropes. And previous to that, like the kind of shows you'd see on television in the 70s, they were all cop shows. Like cop shows were the big thing. So typically, if you had black characters, a lot of times they were criminals. Because everybody who was cast on the show was a criminal 9 times out of 10. But, it was, that was the era. That was the era. That was the time. It wasn't like people sat around and said, gee, how can we make black people look bad? That was the only thing they could really think to write. There wasn't, there was still sort of like, the black communities were still kind of trying to rise up. Civil rights had only been 10 years prior, and people were trying to move up. And then when you get to 75, you get the Jeffersons, and the Jeffersons is about a successful black man. He is successful because he has I think he owns a dry cleaning concern. I think he was a dry cleaner, and he owns like a few branches of that. And he does well, and he has a deluxe apartment in the sky. So in 73, when they add Franklin to the cast of Peanuts, they're trying to be inclusive. But that's about all they achieved, right? I mean, they didn't have a big history to work from Franklin, because I don't think he was one of the original Peanuts. But he is treated as an equal. He is treated just like any of them. Charlie Brown greets him at the door in this special. You know, but beyond that, there's nothing much to the guy. He is a supporting character in a cast of characters. The main character, of course, being Charlie Brown, his sister Lucy, Linus, his best friend. And this special is about him trying to impress Peppermint Patty. He promises her a Thanksgiving dinner, and then Snoopy cooks it, but like it's popcorn, toast, and candy. You know, it's little kid stuff, and they're all little kids, so it's not like there is a racial divide here. So why is Franklin sitting by himself and the major character sitting on the right side of the table? It's because all the characters on the right side of the table, including Linus, are the ones with all the lines. They're trying to keep a consistent camera angle. The girl in the foreground is Peppermint Patty's sidekick. I forget her name, but her only contribution to the dialogue is like, "Yes, sir." She calls Peppermint Patty sir. And Peppermint Patty herself is kind of an icon of lesbians, because she's considered like an early lesbian character, because they consider her and the other girl like a couple almost, and you know, she calls her Peppermint Patty sir. But Peppermint Patty's really just a tomboy. She's just a girl who's aggressive and kind of tomboyish. So they're all on the right side of the table, because when you shoot it in terms of, I mean, they don't shoot this, but like in terms of the camera angle, you know, you want to shoot Linus and all the characters on the right, because they have all the dialogue. Snoopy didn't really have any dialogue, but he deals out all the food. And by the way, the food's all wrong, because this isn't the food Snoopy serves. So maybe this takes place before Snoopy doles out all the food. But Franklin doesn't really have any lines. So there's no reason to have him. I mean, look, if Franklin and Peppermint Patty's sidekick had lines too, they probably would have put them all on the other side of the table. Understand, that's how you would do it in a sitcom. That's how they did it on All in the Family. Everybody sat on one side of the table, because you couldn't have somebody's back to the audience. So it would be Archie and Edith. I think, were they on either side of the table? I think they were on either end of the table, so their side could at least be open to the audience. And then Meathead and Archie's daughter, I forget her name, played by Sally Struthers, would be on the same side of the table. But you wouldn't sit that way in your home, right? If there were 4 people, you'd each get a side of the table. If this was actual kids sitting at a table, yeah, one of them would sit on Franklin's side, because that would even it up, and it would make more room for, you know, Charlie Brown and Peppermint Patty. They would have more room, and Snoopy, well, he's a dog. He wouldn't be at the table. So, I mean, this is a kid's scene, and they're trying to make it out as a racism, because Franklin is sitting by himself, and they think that somehow ostracizes him. Now, you can argue that Franklin doesn't have a very big role in the Peanuts gang, and that's true. He never was much of a character, really. He was just a guy who was there. Just another member of the gang to kind of round things out a bit. And so they could be inclusive and get credits for being woke. I mean, that's why he was probably created. He was probably created because, like, hey, everybody. I think he was in the comic strip, though. Maybe not in the beginning, but definitely later. And so, I mean, at least give them their points for trying to include people, trying to make it a little diverse. And certainly you got to give them major points for Peppermint Patty if that was indeed the idea, that, you know, Although I think it was kind of a joke that the sidekick called Patty Sir. I don't think it was meant to be a lesbian thing, but who knows? Maybe it was. Maybe that was the whole point, like to sneak in lesbians, so people didn't even realize. And it could be like super progressive, kind of under the radar. I mean, they did a lot of that kind of stuff in the 70s. Under the radar, but super progressive stuff, if you really dug down deep and looked into it. They did that on Star Trek. They had a big hippie episode. I don't know if you remember that one. The hippies are trying to find a planet to live on. It'll be a paradise, and it's kind of like a hippie cult almost, but in the end it all goes wrong, because it always went wrong for the hippies in the end on 70s TV shows. So should we get bent out of shape about a cartoon made in 1973 that people like? No, people like it, and they don't like it because we can watch Franklin sit all by himself. They don't even notice Franklin. Franklin is almost a non-entity in these shows. And if that bothers you, I mean, you don't have to watch it. It's an old cartoon. It's not really about Franklin. He's not the main character. He's just in there. He's just in there to sort of have some extra people in the mix. So, I mean, you don't have to watch it. It's a fun cartoon. I used to watch it every year. It's weird that it's not on broadcast TV anymore, but times change. And, it was meant to be an inoffensive kind of entertainment about kids. Because the Peanuts gang, they're kids. They're just kids. They're not making a big statement here with this. They're just doing a nice, cute story about kids who are friends. And they got a crazy dog and a couple of wacky things happen. But no one gets hurt. No one's mean to each other. Everybody in the end, they end up being friends. And, you could take away from... Now, if you're going to take away from that and say, well, no, it's really all meant to be racism. I mean, really, you're just seeing racism in everything. So, will they ever do anything significant with the Franklin character? I don't know. I guess if they started a regular TV show with the Peanuts gang, you could eventually, like South Park, drill down into the history of each cast member, and eventually you'd probably get to Franklin. Just like South Park eventually got to Butters. They eventually got to Token. After years and years, they finally did stories about some of the side characters. But in the beginning, it was all about the main characters. And this is relatively early in the Charlie Brown history. I mean, this is one of their classic shows, one of their classic specials. It was this and the Christmas special, and a couple of others. I mean, they didn't have a lot of material for Peanuts. The comic strips have tons of material. I mean, you can go back and complain about them, I guess, but most people don't. And I'm sure you could pick through this and pick all sorts of problems with it that would offend you, but it's not meant to offend anyone. It never was. This is the most inoffensive entertainment at that time. So, if you're bent out of shape about the Peanuts gang, you're really, really reaching. I mean, Charles Schultz himself was incredibly progressive for his time. He was super woke. And, he would have been appalled at people doing this. Thank God he's not around to hear this nonsense. I'm sure he'd have been canceled in a heartbeat on Twitter for being an old cis white male who didn't understand anything. He was a nice guy for his time, and everybody liked him, and everybody likes the Peanuts gang. I mean, it's like the Archie gang, or any of the other creations from that time period. It was meant for kids. It was meant for children. And the people who watch it now, a lot of them just watch it for nostalgia purposes. Or they watch it with their kids because it is inoffensive. Except for, some people.